In the year 2157, humanity had perfected itself, at least on the surface. Through the marvels of genetic engineering, cosmetic augmentations, and advanced AI-driven surgeries, people had achieved their ideal forms. Symmetry reigned supreme, every imperfection was smoothed over. Beauty, now a commodity, was attainable for anyone who could afford it. In the sprawling metropolis of Icarus Prime, where towering spires gleamed under an artificially optimized sky, it was impossible to walk down a street without being overwhelmed by flawless faces. For Elise Kane, this was a problem. A brilliant scientist working in bioengineering, she had spent years manipulating genomes and developing breakthroughs in human enhancement. Yet, the more she contributed to the so-called advancement of humanity, the more disconnected she felt. Everyone looked the same, perfect, but hollow. They had become like mannequins, living in a world that was too smooth, too symmetrical. Elise had watched her friends chase beauty like it was the highest form of currency, each enhancement bringing them closer to what society defined as ideal. But with every new perfect cheekbone or chiseled jawline, they seemed to lose something vital: curiosity, compassion, individuality. Late one night, alone in her sterile, high-rise apartment, Elise found herself staring at the reflection of her own genetically enhanced face in the mirror. Her features were mathematically flawless, sculpted by decades of refinement. Yet the reflection staring back at her felt foreign, like a mask she had worn for so long that she had forgotten what lay beneath. That was when the invitation arrived. It came in the form of a small, sleek data card slipped under her door, which was odd because everything in Icarus Prime was digital. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. There was no name, no sender, just a flickering holographic image of an eclipse. Below it, a short, cryptic message appeared: "You are invited to meet the most unique man on Earth. He has asked for your hand in marriage. If you accept, you will find him in the shadows of the eclipse zone. There, truth beyond beauty awaits." Elise blinked at the message, unsure if it was a joke or some kind of elaborate prank. The eclipse zone was a place whispered about in the corners of society, a shadowy district on the farthest outskirts of the city. No one who followed the societal norms of Icarus Prime ever ventured there. It was where the anomalies lived, those whose genetic makeup deviated from perfection either by choice or by nature. Some said the people there were dangerous, others said they were simply forgotten. The rational part of her mind told her to throw the card away and forget about it. But something deeper, something primal, stirred in her. There was an allure in the mystery, in the idea that somewhere out there, someone who was different, truly different, existed. And the thought of someone asking for her specifically, without knowing her perfect facade, sent a thrill through her. Days passed, but the message lingered in her thoughts. She tried to focus on her work, but each time she peered into a microscope or calculated the next formula for enhancing human genes, the words echoed in her mind: truth beyond beauty. Finally, unable to shake the feeling, she made her decision. She would go to the eclipse zone. The eclipse zone was nothing like Icarus Prime. While the city gleamed with polished chrome and glass, the eclipse zone was a labyrinth of shadows and organic decay. Its towering buildings were not the result of sleek, sterile design, but rather a chaotic jumble of old architecture that had survived the city's relentless expansion. Dark alleys twisted and turned without reason, while vines and moss covered walls that hadn't been cleaned in years. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting eerie glows onto the cracked pavement. As Elise made her way through the maze of streets, she felt out of place. Her tailored white coat and perfect complexion seemed jarringly wrong in this world of rough edges and real flaws. The people here stared at her, some with curiosity, others with disdain, but no one approached. There was a rawness to their appearance that she hadn't seen in years. Their faces were uneven, their skin marred with scars or freckles, and their clothes were patched and worn. But they had something Elise hadn't seen in a long time: life, raw and unfiltered. Following the cryptic directions on the card, Elise finally arrived at a derelict building with a rusted door. A faint, pulsating light glowed from beneath it, and as she hesitated for just a moment, the door creaked open on its own. Stepping inside, she was met with darkness, save for the faint glow of candles scattered across the floor. The room felt like a sanctuary, ancient and untouched by the perfection-obsessed world outside. And then, from the shadows, he emerged. Varos. He was, by every standard of Icarus Prime, ugly. His skin was rough and textured with intricate ridges, as though his face had been sculpted by an artist who had chosen to defy all conventional rules of beauty. His eyes were silver, luminescent orbs that seemed to see through everything the room, even the world outside. His nose was slightly crooked, his jaw uneven, and yet there was an undeniable presence to him, something commanding and otherworldly. "Welcome, Elise," Varos said, his voice low and resonant, as if it carried the weight of many lifetimes. "I've been waiting for you." Elise's heart raced. How could he know her? How could he have known she would come? "Why did you send for me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She wasn't afraid, more intrigued than she had ever been in her life. Varos stepped closer, his silver eyes locking onto hers. "Because you're not like the others. You see the world for what it truly is, a facade. You're searching for something real, something beyond what your society offers. I can give you that." Elise felt her throat tighten. "And you think marriage is the answer?" He smiled, a crooked, strange smile that somehow disarmed her. "Marriage is just a word. What I'm offering is far more than that. I want to show you a truth that few have ever seen. But you must choose." Her mind swirled with questions, doubts, but at the same time, something deep within her yearned for the unknown, for a life that wasn't predictable or perfect. "I accept," Elise said before she could stop herself. Varos nodded, as though he had expected no other answer. "Then be prepared, Elise. For when we leave the ceremony, you will see a world that will change everything." Her pulse quickened. Elise had no idea what she had just agreed to, but she knew one thing for certain: this was the beginning of something extraordinary. The night of the wedding arrived far sooner than Elise anticipated. In the days leading up to it, time seemed to warp, speeding up and slowing down in disorienting waves, as though the universe itself was preparing her for something monumental. Elise had told no one about her decision. She couldn't. How could she explain to her colleagues, her family, that she was about to marry a man she had met only once, a man whom society deemed unworthy of attention, let alone affection? A man who lived in the shadows of their perfect world. Her thoughts swirled as she prepared in the solitude of her apartment. The simplicity of her attire felt appropriate for the occasion, a stark contrast to the extravagant, fashion-engineered gowns that were typical for weddings in Icarus Prime. She wore a plain, ivory dress made of lightweight, fluid material, unadorned by the unnecessary flourishes that marked the city's artificial aesthetic. There was no need for jewelry, no genetic enhancements to make her eyes sparkle or her hair glow. She wanted to be real. The simplicity made her feel raw, as though she were shedding the skin of the perfect world she had been part of for so long. As she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she no longer saw the perfect symmetry of her genetically modified features. Instead, she saw a woman about to step into the unknown, a woman filled with both apprehension and excitement. The streets of Icarus Prime were quiet when she left her apartment. It was late, and most of the city's inhabitants had retreated to their meticulously designed homes, leaving the towering spires and sky bridges eerily still. Her footsteps echoed as she walked toward the eclipse zone. As she crossed the invisible boundaries separating the gleaming metropolis from the dark, unregulated part of the city, she felt a chill run through her. The eclipse zone was alive in a way the rest of the city wasn't. The streets bustled with people who looked, by Icarus Prime standards, imperfect. Their faces were lined with wrinkles, their bodies carried scars and imperfections, and yet their eyes sparkled with vitality. Unlike the engineered perfection of Icarus Prime, the eclipse zone felt real, organic, and alive. The chaos of it was strangely comforting. She arrived at the same derelict building where she had first met Varos. The door creaked open again, seemingly of its own accord, and she stepped inside. This time, the room was different. Instead of the soft glow of scattered candles, the entire space was bathed in a faint, silvery light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Shadows danced along the walls, moving like living things. The air hummed with an energy she couldn't quite place, like a low-frequency vibration just at the edge of her awareness. In the center of the room stood Varos, waiting for her. He was dressed in simple, dark robes that made his silver eyes shine even more brightly against the dim light. Around him, a circle of figures stood, cloaked in shadow. Elise couldn't make out their faces, but she felt their presence, heavy and ancient. These weren't ordinary wedding guests. They were something else, something far older, far more powerful. Varos stepped forward as she entered, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. There was no smile this time, no words of comfort. Only the sense that something immense and irreversible was about to happen. "Are you ready, Elise?" he asked softly, his voice resonating with a depth that seemed to vibrate through her bones. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Varos extended his hand, and she took it, her fingers trembling slightly as they intertwined with his. His touch was warm, grounding her in the moment. Together, they stepped into the center of the room, surrounded by the shadowy figures. The ceremony began without preamble, without the pomp and circumstance Elise had expected. There were no vows spoken aloud, no ceremonial gestures, no officiant standing between them. Instead, Varos and Elise stood facing each other, the air around them thick with an unseen force that seemed to bind them together. The figures surrounding them began to chant in low, unfamiliar voices, their words sounding ancient and alien, vibrating through the air like a pulse. Elise felt a strange sensation ripple through her body, as if the space around them was shifting, warping, and stretching. The room seemed to fold in on itself, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she was still standing in that old, forgotten building in the eclipse zone or if they had been transported somewhere else entirely. Then Varos spoke, his voice cutting through the chanting, a quiet command. "Do you accept this bond, knowing it will change everything?" His words carried a weight that made Elise's heart skip a beat. This wasn't just about marriage, it was about something far greater, something far more dangerous. She could feel it in the air, in the way the shadows seemed to writhe and shift around them. This was a commitment not just to Varos, but to a new reality, one that lay beyond the world she had always known. "I accept," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of energy that filled the room. As soon as the words left her lips, the air around them seemed to crackle with electricity. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and the light in the room shifted, becoming brighter and sharper. Elise felt a pull in her chest, as if something deep within her was being drawn out, expanded. Her senses were overwhelmed. She could hear the pulse of the universe, feel the vibration of time itself. Varos's grip on her hand tightened, anchoring her. His silver eyes burned with an otherworldly light as he leaned in and whispered in her ear, his voice both a promise and a warning. "Once we leave this place, nothing will ever be the same. You will see beyond the veil of this world." Before Elise could respond, a burst of light engulfed them. The figures around them dissolved into shadows, and the room itself seemed to fall away. For a moment, everything was blinding, disorienting. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. They were standing outside the building now, but it wasn't the eclipse zone she had stepped into earlier. The world around them had changed. The towering spires of Icarus Prime were gone, replaced by a strange, shimmering landscape that defied description. The sky above was filled with unfamiliar stars, glowing in shades of violet and blue. The air hummed with a strange energy, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse with life. Elise stared in stunned silence, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. This wasn't just another part of the city, this was something else, something beyond her understanding. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Varos smiled, his expression softening for the first time since the ceremony had begun. This, he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence, is the truth. Welcome to the hidden universe. The world around them was like nothing Elise had ever imagined, a place where the laws of physics seemed to bend, where light and shadow danced together in ways that defied explanation. She could feel the weight of the universe pressing against her mind, challenging her perceptions, urging her to look deeper. But for the first time in her life, Elise didn't feel afraid. She felt free. And as she stood beside Varos, staring into the infinite expanse of the hidden universe, she knew that her life, her very existence, had changed forever. Elise stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat as she tried to take in the sheer impossibility of what she was seeing. The world around her no longer resembled the Icarus Prime she had known her entire life. In its place was a strange, dreamlike landscape where reality seemed to blur and shift with every glance. The sky above was a swirling canvas of colors violet, indigo, and silver that shimmered and pulsed as if alive. Stars hung impossibly close, large and luminous, their light casting long, otherworldly shadows across the ground. But even the ground beneath her feet was no longer the solid, concrete pavement of the eclipse zone. Instead, it was a soft, glowing substance, like liquid light, shifting and flowing beneath her shoes with every step. "Where are we?" Elise whispered, her voice trembling as she reached out instinctively to touch Varos's arm. Varos stood beside her, calm and composed, his silver eyes gleaming in the soft light. "This is the hidden universe," he said quietly. "The world that exists beneath the one you've always known." Elise's mind reeled. How could such a place exist? She had spent her entire life believing in the rigid boundaries of science, of the physical world governed by laws and equations. But here, nothing made sense. The air itself felt different, charged with a strange energy that seemed to hum through her skin. Varos led her forward, guiding her gently across the luminous ground. The horizon stretched infinitely in every direction, filled with shimmering structures that looked like cities, but not any cities she had ever seen. Towers of crystal twisted toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting the strange colors of the stars above. Shapes moved within the structures, but they were not human. Elise couldn't make out their details, only that they were vast, ethereal beings made of light and shadow. As they walked, Varos began to explain. "What you've known as Earth, what the people of Icarus Prime think of as reality, is only a small part of the greater whole. There are layers to existence, dimensions stacked on top of each other, like the pages of a book. Most people can only see the surface. But those of us who are different, those of us who were born with the ability to perceive the hidden layers, we see beyond." Elise's thoughts raced as she tried to process what he was saying. "You mean this has always been here? We've just been blind to it?" Varos nodded. "Yes. Humans have evolved to see only a narrow slice of reality. It's a survival mechanism designed to keep you grounded in the physical world. But there are others like me who are different. Our genetic makeup allows us to perceive the hidden universe, to see the structures and beings that exist beyond the veil." The veil. Elise remembered him mentioning it before, but now, standing in this strange place, she began to understand what he meant. The world she had grown up in, the perfect, engineered world of Icarus Prime, was a carefully constructed illusion. Beneath it, around it, lay a much more complex reality. A reality that only a few could see. She glanced at Varos, her curiosity burning. "What are you? You said you're different. But how?" Varos hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I was created," he said finally, his voice soft. "Not in the way humans are, but through an experiment conducted long ago. My kind was designed to bridge the gap between the physical world and the hidden universe. We are part human, part something else, something older." Elise's heart pounded as she absorbed his words. "Older? You mean there's something beyond humans? Another race?" Varos smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Yes. Long before humanity existed, there were other beings who walked this universe. Some were physical, like you, but others existed purely in the hidden layers. Over time, as the dimensions shifted and the universe expanded, these beings faded into the background, becoming part of the fabric of reality, but their influence remains. I am one of the few who carry their legacy. Elise felt a shiver run through her. So you're not entirely human. No, Varro said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Not entirely. They continued to walk, the landscape shifting and changing around them. The cities of light and shadow faded, replaced by vast, open plains where the ground glowed like molten metal. Above them, strange creatures soared through the sky, their forms like nothing Elise had ever seen, large, translucent beings with wings that shimmered like glass. They moved gracefully through the air, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were gliding through water rather than air. Elise's breath caught as one of the creatures swooped low, its enormous form casting a shadow over them. For a moment, she could see its eyes, huge, luminous orbs that seemed to hold the weight of entire galaxies within them. "What are they?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Guardians," Varros replied. "They are beings who exist to maintain balance between the dimensions. They watch over the hidden universe, ensuring that the boundaries between worlds remain intact. They are as old as time itself." Elise's mind was spinning, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of everything she was learning. She had spent her entire life believing in a world defined by scientific principles, by facts and figures. But now, she was standing in a place where those principles no longer applied, where reality was something fluid and ever-changing. They stopped at the edge of a great canyon that stretched endlessly before them. Below, swirling currents of energy flowed like rivers, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. Varros turned to face her, his expression serious. "This is the truth you've been seeking, Elise," he said, his voice low and resonant. "The world you grew up in, the world of perfection and control, it's only a small part of what exists. You were never meant to see this, but you've always had the potential. That's why I chose you." Elise looked at him, her mind racing. "Why me? What makes me different?" Varros stepped closer, his silver eyes locking onto hers. "Because you question. You see beyond the surface. Most people in Icarus Prime are content with their engineered lives, their flawless bodies, their carefully constructed realities. But you've always wanted more. You've always known, deep down, that there's something missing. That's why you came to me." Elise's chest tightened as she realized the truth of his words. She had spent years feeling disconnected from the world around her, searching for something she couldn't name. And now, standing here in this hidden universe, she understood what that something was. "You're not bound by the same rules as the others," Varros continued. "You have the ability to see, to understand, in ways they never could. That's why I needed you. Together, we can unlock the full potential of what lies beyond." Elise's heart raced. She had always been driven by a desire to push the boundaries of science, to understand the mysteries of the universe. But now, faced with a reality so vast and complex, she wasn't sure if she was ready. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice trembling. It's all too much." Varros reached out, gently taking her hand. His touch was warm, grounding her once more. "You're stronger than you think, Elise. You've already taken the first step. You've seen the hidden universe. Now, you just have to trust yourself to keep going." Elise looked out over the glowing canyon, the currents of energy swirling below. The universe was so much larger, so much more complex than she had ever imagined. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She turned to Varros, her resolve hardening. "What do we do next?" Varros smiled, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "We explore. We learn. We unlock the secrets of this universe together." And with that, they stepped forward, ready to face the infinite unknown. The days that followed felt like an endless dream, a journey that defied everything Elise had ever known. She and Varos moved through the hidden universe as if they had always belonged there, each step taking them deeper into a world where reality and possibility danced together in ways that the human mind could barely comprehend. Yet, with every new discovery, Elise felt something else shift within her, something profound and irreversible. They explored places she could never have imagined. They walked on surfaces that seemed to breathe beneath their feet, traversed landscapes that shimmered with strange, iridescent energy, and stood before vast cosmic structures that stretched across dimensions. One moment, they were standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking a sea of stars. The next, they were within the folds of a dimension where time moved like liquid, where past, present, and future blended together in a continuous, fluid stream. Varos was her guide, but he was also much more than that. As they ventured deeper into the mysteries of the hidden universe, Elise realized that he wasn't simply leading her through new worlds, he was helping her understand herself in ways she had never thought possible. "You're evolving, Elise," Varos said one night as they stood beneath the light of a strange, alien moon. Its surface was covered in geometric patterns that shifted and changed, casting shadows that seemed to whisper as they moved. "You're beginning to see beyond the surface of things, beyond what your eyes were trained to perceive." Elise glanced at him, the silver glow of his eyes reflecting the moon's light. "I feel it," she admitted. "I don't just see these places anymore, I feel them. It's like I'm connected to them somehow, like I can understand their essence." Varos nodded. "That's because you are connected. The more time you spend here, the more your perception will expand. Eventually, you'll see the universe the way I do. Not as a series of separate entities, but as one interconnected whole." The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had spent her entire life living in a world that valued the tangible, the physical, yet here she was, in a place where those things seemed almost insignificant. She was no longer bound by the rules of Icarus Prime, no longer confined by the limitations of the engineered, perfect world she had once known. And the deeper she went into this journey with Varos, the more she realized how artificial that world had been. It wasn't long before Elise began to notice other changes. At first, they were subtle, small shifts in her perception. The way the light in the hidden universe seemed to bend and twist around her, the way time no longer felt like a linear march, but something more flexible. But soon, those changes became more pronounced. She found herself able to sense the energies of the beings that moved through the hidden universe, creatures of light and shadow that existed on the edges of reality. She could feel the currents of the universe itself, the way they pulsed with life, the way they connected everything. And she began to see Varos differently, too. At first, his appearance had been shocking, jarring. His asymmetrical face, the ridges on his skin, his silver eyes, they had all seemed alien to her, unsettling even. But now, she saw him with new eyes. The ridges on his skin were no longer flaws, but intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story, a reflection of the hidden universe itself. His asymmetry wasn't a defect, but a sign of his connection to something far greater than the rigid, manufactured beauty of Icarus Prime. One night, as they stood together on the shores of a vast, glowing sea, Elise reached out and traced the lines of his face with her fingertips. She marveled at the texture of his skin, the way the light of the universe seemed to dance across it. "You're beautiful," she whispered, the realization hitting her with a force that took her breath away. "I never saw it before, but you're beautiful." Varos smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that sent warmth radiating through her. "You're not the one who's changed, Elise. You've simply opened your eyes." As they traveled, Varos began to teach her how to manipulate her perception of reality. He showed her how to shift her awareness so that she could see the layers of existence, the threads that connected everything in the hidden universe. Soon, Elise was able to travel between dimensions as easily as she once walked the streets of Icarus Prime. She felt like a different person, no longer bound by the limitations of her former life. One day, they stood at the edge of a vast, crystalline structure that stretched endlessly into the sky. It pulsed with light, like a living entity, and Elise could feel its energy humming through her veins. "This is one of the oldest structures in the hidden universe," Varos explained, his voice filled with awe. "It's a remnant of a time before humanity, before even the Guardians. It holds the memories of the universe itself." Elise stared up at the structure, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of its history, the knowledge it held. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers brushing against its surface. In an instant, a flood of images and sensations overwhelmed her. She saw the birth of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the slow, steady march of time. She saw beings of light and shadow, their forms shifting and changing as they moved through the fabric of reality. She felt the pulse of the universe, the way everything was connected, the way everything was part of a greater whole. When she finally pulled her hand away, she was trembling. Varos watched her closely, his silver eyes filled with understanding. "You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? The truth that lies beyond the surface of things." Elise nodded, still breathless from the experience. "It's so much bigger than I ever imagined." Varos smiled. "It always is." Their return to Earth came unexpectedly. After what felt like an eternity exploring the hidden universe, Elise and Varos found themselves once again standing on the streets of Icarus Prime. But the city looked different now, almost artificial in comparison to the vastness of the hidden universe. As they walked through the gleaming, perfect streets, people stared at them, at Varos specifically. To the citizens of Icarus Prime, he was still the ugliest man on Earth. His asymmetrical face, his ridged skin, his silver eyes, these were things that society could not accept, could not understand. To them, he was an aberration. But Elise no longer saw it that way. She looked at Varos and saw the beauty in his difference, the depth in his eyes, the connection he had to a universe that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. They passed by a group of people who stared openly, their eyes filled with judgment. One woman, her features perfectly sculpted and symmetrical, whispered something to her companion, and they both laughed, their eyes fixed on Varos. Elise's heart tightened, but she didn't say anything. She simply squeezed Varos's hand, a silent message of solidarity. They reached the edge of the city, where the buildings gave way to the wild, unregulated landscapes beyond. Elise turned to face Varos, her breath catching as she looked into his eyes. "You've shown me so much," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I can't ever go back to the way things were." Varos smiled, his expression soft and full of understanding. "You don't have to. You've seen the truth now. You've seen the universe for what it really is. You'll never be the same." Elise nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She knew he was right. She had changed in ways she couldn't fully explain, and there was no going back. The Elise who had lived in Icarus Prime, who had sought perfection and control, was gone. Now, she was something more. As they stood together at the edge of the city, looking out at the horizon, Elise felt a deep sense of peace. She had found what she had been searching for, something real, something beyond the surface. And as she looked at Varos, the man who had shown her the hidden universe, she knew that she had found something far more valuable than beauty. She had found truth. And in that truth, she had found herself.